Prince Philip, welcome to the show.
Hi, Stefan. Thanks for having me on. And please, you can call me just Philip.
Okay, that's great. I mean, it was a pleasure to meet you, Philip. I met you at Bitcoin 22, and
Correct.
it's been awesome to see you coming into the space, at least more publicly. I know you were more privately watching on as well prior to that. I'm curious to hear a little bit of your story. I know you come from the royal family of Serbia and Yugoslavia. And I could imagine, you know, Bitcoin might not necessarily be interesting to someone from that kind of background. What was it for you?
Well, my background was that I first came into Bitcoin, first purchased Bitcoin 2017, but I knew about it a few years before. But it wasn't until one of my best friends, a guy called Dan, says, "Hey, look at Bitcoin. It's going up. Why don't you get into it?" I was like, "Oh, really?" And he goes, "What's so interesting?" I asked him, "What's so interesting about it?" He goes, "Oh, yeah, it has a 21 million cap, and it solves the whole inflation thing." I was like, interesting. That's pretty much all my knowledge at that point. I bought it. I also bought other shit coins, as a lot of us do.
Yeah.
and and really, for me, buying Bitcoin was also because I wanted to make money. I live quite an ordinary life. This was when I was living in London. I had just met my wife. We weren't married yet, but we married a few months later after I purchased my first Bitcoin. And I say Bitcoin, my first Bitcoins, I guess. No, Bitcoin, like singular. Sorry. Then as I started studying more about it later on, maybe going into the whole COVID thing, then I realized that, because I always knew something wrong was with the world, wrong with the world, and I've always known that, money corrupts. But then when you figure out that money is corrupt, money, I think, really should be defined as money is Bitcoin. Really, that's what pure money is. And this is what I started learning more about Bitcoin. I started putting more hours into it. I got safety in the Bitcoin standard. I mean, I think I was listening to a lot of podcasts with Gigi. I remember listening to a few of your podcasts as well. I remember following Sailor, also, Robert Breedlove's What is Money series with Sailor. That was interesting as well. And then, of course, Bitcoin Twitter was a big turning point. Just seeing the commentary that people have there. Some of it brilliant, some of it funny, and some of it just great entertainment. And
Right.
to answer the other part of your question, as I say, as a monarch, I'm not quite a monarch. I'm not. Serbia's not part of the system. The monarchy is not part of the system in Serbia yet. Maybe we can change that one day. But Bitcoin interests me because I've always thought, as I said, that there was something wrong with this world. I didn't know what that really was, and I've always wanted to see what I can do to make a difference. Um, and I live quite an ordinary life. I mean, I don't live in a palace. I pay rent. I have work. I have a fiat job. Well, I said I did have a fiat job. Still, I'm finishing it now, but we'll talk about that later.
Yeah, sure.
And so, I'm not immune to the world's troubles, really. So I definitely have a passion to try and change that. And then when I figured out what Bitcoin was, and what it also means in line with monarchy, that it has synergies with monarchy, then it really flipped a switch, and I thought to myself, "Oh, this is beautiful. This is something I want to be a part of, and I want to make a difference with." And it was really a humbling moment, and it really gave more meaning to my life.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I think everyone comes to Bitcoin in their own way. They've got their own ideas about it, and I think people it's also been said it's almost like a Rorschach test, right? It's like in some ways you sort of see what you wanted to see, or see a reflection of yourself. And I think there are definitely different angles and ways people can get into it. And I certainly came to it from a perspective of liberty and sound money, right? Like that was basically the main uh, thing I saw that was awesome about Bitcoin. I'm curious whether economics was one of your focuses. I know you were working in the world of finance as well. So even pre-Bitcoin, was that something you were studying?
So I actually studied languages at university, and after graduating, I went into finance. I mean, it's different. It's a different leap. But then I studied finance when I joined my first financial company. This was back in London, in the city of London, back in 2006. And I gained my financial knowledge through those companies, through the companies, through the courses that they had on offer. I was going to some courses in central London, like these universities, BPP, and all these sort of professional universities, and that's where I picked up my financial knowledge. Then the financial crisis happened, and I decided to leave finance and go into hospitality management. So I went to Switzerland, Lausanne, the hotel school, the École Hôtelière de Lausanne, and went back to London to start my job in hotel management, where I worked at the Ritz Hotel. And then I realized it's not really my passion working in hotels. I prefer to work in finance. I'm more interested about financial markets, about macroeconomics, and all that. And this was around 2009. And then I got back into finance. And as I'm gaining more experience in finance, I'm realizing that this is really not really making that much sense. It just didn't feel right. I didn't feel like I had much of a purpose for what I was doing. It felt like, you know what I mean. It's to say it
Yeah.
bluntly, I felt the whole thing was a bit of a scam.
Yeah, I think, and I think you're right. I think there's a lot of aspects of finance that have been corrupted by the fact that we are
Completely.
using fiat currency instead. And the way Mises explains sound money, it's two components. It's one is freely chosen by the people, and two, it's absent intervention by the state. And so
Yes.
I think those are the two, I guess, crucial components to make something sound money. Now, if you ask Peter Schiff, he'll say, "Oh, see, it's when you drop the gold coin and it makes a noise. That's why they called it sound money
That's
and whatever." But
yeah.
you know, and maybe that's part of where the name came from. But in terms of like what defines it, I think the Misesian understanding of it certainly is more interesting. Also, I'm curious as well. Like I know if you've been reading safety and looking at various Austrian economics and things like this, I know even in the Austro-libertarian world, there is discussion about this concept of, is monarchy superior to democracy, right? And that's kind of an interesting uh,
Yes.
world of argumentation and stuff like that. I'm curious if you've looked into any of that, if you have any reflections on that.
Actually, I'm about to read Hans Hermann Hoppe's Democracy, the God That Failed. I want to read it side by side alongside with Alex Goldstein, Bitstein. He's determined to buy me the book, so he just found he just bought himself a copy. So we're going to read it side by side. What I you know this is Look, monarchy and bitcoins have a lot of similarities. I mean, they monarchies have had historically long time horizons, or low time preference spanning generations. Monarchs feel a lifelong duty to their country. And compared to democracies, I guess in contrast, politicians typically think in election dates. It's really short term thinking. Wars are expensive as well. So fiat politics as well. Love to get into war, and it's expensive. It's expensive under a gold standard. So monarchs are very hesitant to engage in conflict, while democracies under fiat standards are basically incentivized to engage in warfare. Printing more money is easy. Also, the other book I need to get my hands on is Prince Hans Adams of Liechtenstein. He's written the book. It's a masterpiece, apparently. I'm ordering that as well, and it's The State in the Third Millennium, I believe. And apparently, he makes a compelling case for reimagining the state's role in the future. This is to do with self-determination, I believe. Is the self-determination, I think, is the principle that populations cannot be coerced, but rather upon the state to make an effort to work with its citizens. Um, and the state acts as a service provider, an organizer that serves the people, and not the other way around. So these things, if you look, I mean, I really look forward to reading these two books. But this is what I've been told when I've been discussing it with Bitstein and some other people, that not that democracy is completely broken, but it's definitely not doing many favors to parts of the world. I'd say maybe the best case for the democracy would be someone like Switzerland with the canton system. But you look at other parts of the world and you're thinking to yourself, these other parts of the world, Canada, America, France, Germany, these republics are definitely entering some dark days again.
Right. And I think part of it also comes to now, I guess in right wing circles, this gets referred to as the swamp, right? Like there's this idea that even if you elect a different leader, the system is just so corrupt that it will drive certain outcomes, or that because there's just so much build up and bloat, the governments become so large and so bloated that we end up with these unelected bureaucrats or technocrats who are really in charge, and they're the ones driving and dictating what's going on. And perhaps that's part of what we've seen is the chaos of the last 2 or 3 years with all the various things that
Correct.
have gone on.
It's that essential groupthink that's really dangerous. That centralized power, it's corrupted within. And how can those few people decide what's right for millions around the world, for billions around the world? This is something that will really come to understand and learn as being very unethical, but morally incorrect, morally wrong.
Absolutely. And I think what we've seen as well is people who ostensibly say, oh, look, I'm here to serve you. But in reality, they're trying to make everybody else their servants. And they're not actually trying to serve the people. And in reality, they're just trying to enrich themselves. They're trying to do deals to kind of, make things happen. And so I think that's really where I really see Bitcoin as part of the answer. Maybe it's not everything. I think it's a range of things. Maybe there's a certain cultural pushback. Maybe there's a certain attitude and shift in the way people view the relationship of the state and the citizen, or just the state and the people. Maybe that needs to shift as well. But I'd love to also chat a little bit about your new role. I know you're joining Samson over at Jan
Yes,
3. So do you want to tell us a little bit about how this came about, and what you're hoping to achieve there?
sure. I mean, I can tell you from the beginning how I got to meet Samson was all started in March this year when I went on to Ivan Ivanovic show with my wife. This is the big Serbia's biggest late evening talk show, the like sort of the Saturday Night Live equivalent. To be invited on that's like a big honor, so we were really excited to go on. We met with Ivan a few days before and spoke about just to get to know each other, and he found out that I'm into Bitcoin. So then fast forward onto the show, we were talking. He asked me about my job. I'm there, chatting away, kind of boring, monotonously about my job. And then he just butts in and asks, so is it time to talk about crypto? And I just like took a deep breath. I was like, okay, no, it's not about crypto. It's all about Bitcoin. And that was then picked up by the Bitcoin community. It went viral on Twitter and everything. And next thing I know, I had the likes of Safety, and I'm chatting to people like yourself, and going on to my first ever Bitcoin podcast. My first ever podcast was Daniel Prince's The Once Bitten podcast, and it was fantastic. And thanks to Daniel, who's really great at connecting people, we quickly became good friends, and he put me in touch with a bunch of people, including Samson. So then Daniel was like, "Well, we can go to. What are your plans for beginning of April?" I was like, "Why? What's up? Well, let's go to Miami." I was like, "Oh, really?" It was, "Yeah, we can go there and maybe meet some people and stuff." I was like, "Really? I'll get you tickets. Don't worry, we can sort that out." So he sorts out tickets. We're on a plane. We go there, and next thing I know, I'm meeting everybody. And then I meet with Samson, and Samson is wanting to put me on stage on the panel to speak about Bitcoin and legal tender. I'm on stage with the finance minister or the economic minister of El Salvador, with Samson, and with Joel. He's the guy who is like the CEO, the president who runs Prospera,
Yeah.
and who's mediating it is the moderator is Stacey Herbert. So for me, that was a little bit surreal. And then Samson comes up to me with, "Let's have a meeting, Philip." So we sit down, we're very casually, and we remember there's another Bitcoiner with us, Andre, that was there from Madeira. And
Yeah.
Samson's like, "Hey, Philip, I'm starting a company called Jan3. It's about nation state adoption, and I'm thinking I want to hire you. I want to recruit you." And I was like, "I'm in." Literally didn't even. He's like, "We didn't even talk about the terms and stuff," and I was like, "Well, we can talk about that later, but I'm in." So
That's
he
great to
thought,
hear.
yeah. So he thought I was a great fit for that, which I hope I am. And yeah, so that then took off from there. We talked a lot. We spoke about our terms afterwards, and next thing you know, fast forward to Riga 2 weekends ago, where I last saw you, and that's where it was announced publicly on the stage there. So that for me was a really proud moment, that I came out into the Bitcoin world. Now I'm working for a Bitcoin company, which I'm so proud to be doing.
Right. And just on that point, I think it's interesting. It'll probably be interesting for listeners as well. What was your process or thought process there around quote unquote going public as a Bitcoiner? Because put it this way, you could just stay in the background, keep stacking sats, and just kind
Yeah.
of, live two lives, let's say. What was going through your mind to sort of decide, okay, I'm out, I'm doing this publicly now?
I mean, going public as a Bitcoiner, I mean, it depends on the Bitcoin. I understand for developers and people really involved in that space that they want to keep a very private persona. That's totally fine. But I think it's important to stand up and go public. And I believe I'm maybe probably the first role to go public in support of Bitcoin. So I'm proud of that, yes. But I think my duty is to go orange pill more and to get them to go public. But we can work on that. I mean, I think it's important that Bitcoin has support from people with high levels of business experience and credibility. I mean, people enter into the Bitcoin orbit that open their minds to it. I mean, a figure like Michael Saylor has been a great ally for Bitcoin and elevated the profile. For mass adoption to occur, really, it's important that there's a sufficient social proof from a wider range of credible people. So, I mean, I'm covering the royal side. I think maybe some more business sides, some more, I don't know. I can just throw it out there. People in other actors maybe as well to get involved. People in other disciplines that have musicians, singers. Those sort of people. Scientists, famous scientists. People like that. I think this is really important for Bitcoin and to speed up adoption.
Yeah, and I think you're totally right there. And this is one of those areas on Twitter and discussion forums and things. I see some people say, "Oh, why are you guys like?" As an example, there might be some politician who says something positive about Bitcoin. People might be retweeting that, and then someone on Twitter will be like, "Oh, why are you simping for the politicians? You can't trust any of them." And I mean, here's how I'm seeing it, right? I think we have to try to grow our base of Bitcoiners. We need to grow the
Mm-hmm.
number of people who are into this thing. Now, whether you agree or whether you believe any politician or trust any politician, that's a different matter. But I think from the point of view, as you and I were just chatting, I think it's important that more and more people see it's okay to hold
Mm-hmm.
Bitcoin, talk about Bitcoin, to mine Bitcoin, to run a Bitcoin node, to run a Lightning node, all of these things. I think it massively helps if we can help normalize these things in the minds of the
Correct.
normal people.
Correct. Yeah, I completely agree with that.
Yeah. And so then coming to this idea of, I guess, Jan 3, nation state adoption, that's what
Mm-hmm.
Samson is talking about. So do you want to tell us a little bit about what you're hoping to do there and what are some of the ideas that you're looking to try to use to drive that nation state adoption?
Well, so yes, Samson moved away from Blockstream, that he was leaving Blockstream and starting Jan 3 to focus on nation state adoption. And that's when we talked a bit about. And the Jan 3 mission is to accelerate hyper Bitcoinization. So our tool is to provide, our goal is to provide, sorry, the tools so sovereign nations can adopt a Bitcoin standard, exit the oppressive fiat debt system, and ultimately achieve true sovereignty and prosperity. Um, I mean, look, countries who adopt Bitcoin first will have a huge advantage in the future. This is like what's it, game theory. My role is to engage in conversations and strategic initiatives with nation states, corporations, individuals who wish to explore transitioning to a Bitcoin standard. So to talk about anything about adopting Bitcoin, any sort of way or form. Um, yeah, I mean, I look forward to starting conversations with politicians, with company lead CEOs, with monarchs as well, and get the conversation going as we just talked about. Get them to sign up to download a wallet, to get them to buy a little bit, just to get the hands dirty, to see how it works, and it's not too difficult. I mean, it's pretty easy stuff. Yeah, understanding Bitcoin takes a long time, and we're all still learning. But the actual process of actually downloading a wallet, buying Bitcoin, and holding it, and having your own keys it takes 20 minutes in total, and from the go, to show somebody, or less.
Absolutely. And so when it comes to nation state adoption, what does that mean for you? Does that mean, are we talking about legal tender laws? Are we talking about that nation state doing Bitcoin mining? Are we talking about just removal of capital gains tax laws?
A,
Just
a
favorable
bit of
laws?
A bit of everything, yeah. So favorable legislation is one thing. Countries, for example, Serbia. I'll take an example of Serbia. With that, last year they introduced their crypto regulations. I hate saying crypto, but I have to. Crypto regulations, and not favorable at all. They have capital gains tax. They make it difficult for existing companies or new companies to regain or gain their licenses. Really not good. This is, it's backwards. It's just going to push away the fastest growing industry to another country. So I think in that situation, with Serbia's situation, is to go back to the drawing board and have conversations again with industry experts and with the regulators, and sit down and figure out what is in best for both sides. And that's one conversation to have. Obviously, for me, the main points there is to get rid of capital gains, to protect people's right to hold their private keys and to run nodes peacefully, and yeah, capital gains, to make it treated like a currency itself. And I think that's really important. But with other aspects is like mining. That's another area. It's to work on the whole energy. Bitcoin's also an energy revolution. So to go find where grids out there with stranded energy, and to reinforce them with Bitcoin mining. Well, I shouldn't call it mining anymore. I had a good chat with Pierre Rocher, and he likes to not, he likes to say that Bitcoin mining, actually, according to the white paper, it's time stamping.
Right. Right.
I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
he's right.
Because he's trying
Yeah,
to reframe certain ideas. Like he's
yeah,
saying
exactly.
you're actually extending the chain of blocks, and it's timestamping
Exactly.
rather than
It's time stamping.
mining.
And it's time chain as opposed to blockchain and things like that. So, so yeah, we're going to help other countries to get into time stamping, and secure their grids as well. Have conversations. There's opportunity there, all in South America and in Africa. A lot of hydroelectric dams are being opened up. There's a lot of coal usage around in these countries as well, and to sort of clean that up as well. If you add Bitcoin mining to that, you also produce some revenue to try and help you go to something a bit cleaner. Obviously, not to solar or wind. We know the problems there, but there's a lot of things that we can work on. Yes, ideally, it would be to go and make them introduce it as a legal tender, but that doesn't always have to be a legal tender yet. We will get there eventually.
Right. And I think if- probably what's really needed is just merely the removal of the capital gains tax, right? It doesn't
Yeah,
necessarily have to be the legal
yeah,
tender.
that's
But I
it.
mean, I guess people have kind of conflated those two concepts in their mind, when actually maybe we could disaggregate those. And I know even with El Salvador, with Bitcoin law, Article 7 was a little bit controversial amongst libertarians because they were saying, oh, this is like forced acceptance. Now, look, in practice, I think very few actual merchants in El Salvador were like forced to accept Bitcoin,
Yes,
but
yes.
that was part of the discussion, right?
I mean, yeah. I mean, look, I think in El Salvador, some people argued that it was too much of a top-down approach, but they've adopted Bitcoin, and you can still use the US dollar. You have options, so it's not like you have to use Bitcoin there. But it's working. As far as I'm concerned, it's working, and this is something that we want to work is showing that when you um, when you adopt Bitcoin, you can also continue using the fiat system, the currency as well. Fiat currency can also work on the Bitcoin rails, the Bitcoin railway system, I guess, which makes things life a lot cheaper for the individual. So when there's for remittance is one massive thing. There's billions of dollars. I think it's 300. I'm just quoting a figure more and a rough figure, but I think going to South America from around the world is about $350 billion in remittance every year, and a lot of that is taken away through fees. Bitcoin can take away that. This is another area that Jan 3 is going to be working. We have a product, the Aqua wallet, that was designed in Blockstream that Samson helped to design, and that will help Latin America. It's a good wallet that has that also has supports USDT as well, and it has Liquid and Lightning attached to it as well. And this is things like this are really easy to just download for individuals, and they can start receiving money from abroad for almost nothing. These things can really start helping people to get their hands dirty, to start realizing that getting into Bitcoin is really easy. And there's where the adoption comes from bottom up, but from a top down perspective, what we're trying to do, but also we're also doing bottom up stuff as well. But from the top down perspective, is we're trying to make sure that governments understand that people want this technology, and if you help facilitate it, that government, that individual, those politicians who do it will be remembered kindly.
Right.
will will be doing a massive difference for the rest for their country for the rest of time. And yeah, and also just to stop them having that hammered down and hammering down Bitcoin, because if they do that, they're just perpetuating the problems that many billions of people around the world are just having to live through every day.
I
So
see. So
yeah,
So fair to say then it's some combination of things like advocacy, lobbying, but also technology play to
yes,
sort of
yes,
demonstrate and give them perhaps some ideas around here's some technology that you could use uh, to sort of either show because and I think this is an interesting idea as well, right? Like just if we look at the example of MicroStrategy, Michael Saylor had to first orange pill himself, right? Listening to the podcasts, reading Safety, reading the bullish case for Bitcoin, reading Parker Lewis's Gradually Then Suddenly, and then he orange pilled himself, and only then could he, go and orange pill his board, his C level,
yes,
and
yes.
do that move at a company level. So I think it's the same kind of idea even at a country level. You might need to orange pill a few influential people before you can get the rest of them.
Yes, exactly. Um, and look, look where he is right now. If we're not careful, he's going to buy he's going to buy all the Bitcoin out there. But it's impossible, impossible. But this is it. That's it. It's if as soon as education is the other key area. I think through Michael Saylor saying that you need to have, if you haven't studied Bitcoin for at least 100 hours, then you don't have it's not worth you to talking about Bitcoin, and it's totally true. People talk, when you first tell someone about Bitcoin and they come up with their reasons against it, and it's like, do you know anything else? I mean, how long? But they've only just not read it on in the media, in the mainstream through some FUD and stuff. So it's like, okay, no, go back. I'll help you read it again, and then we can talk. I think it's important we teach people what the history of money is, and how easy it is to use Bitcoin, and how Bitcoin solves so many problems. So yeah, education, conversations are key to all levels, from top down, bottom up.
Right. And so when it comes to nation states, then are you also looking at this idea of similar to El Salvador, hodling some Bitcoin on the nation state balance sheet, or is that an idea you're trying to pursue as well?
Yes, I mean, yes, having on your treasury is would be ideal. So to try and teach them that Bitcoin is the safest and securest asset ever discovered for savings technology ever discovered. And so for nations to have that on their balance sheet, and also for individuals to have that on their balance sheet, companies to have that on their balance sheet as well. So yeah, we will be helping to facilitate that as well.
Right. And I think at a time when we're seeing people seizing each other's assets or countries or
Mhm.
companies, I think that's probably the best time to be teaching people about the ethos of Bitcoin and self custody.
Yes,
So that can obviously
Bitcoin
be
is,
part of the
yeah.
story that you're teaching as well.
Yes, I mean Bitcoin is freedom. I think I said that on the show, on Ivan Ivanovic show, and back in March, and that I really mean that from my heart. Really, it helps people's individual sovereignty, and it's really important for people to hold their own keys of their own private keys, their own wealth that they can store. Yes, they can hold it on their phone, but then they can hold it in cold storage, or they can, they can hold those keys in their head, and that really is profound. That's that you can actually hold your wealth in your head, technically. Um, I mean, it's such a beautiful thing learning about this, and it really blows my mind about this. It's um, I, I every time I'm learning more about Bitcoin, just I'm always finding those head blown moments. Like recently I read Knut's book, Everything Divided by 21. And yeah, that's things, books like that. It's just sorry, I'm deviating from the subject, but I just want to say how beautiful it is learning about the philosophy side of Bitcoin.
Right, yeah, for sure. And so I'm also curious as well because we were talking earlier about how some politicians, or many politicians, in fact, are very short term minded in their
Mhm.
focus. So, how do we get around that then? Because in some ways, obviously, you and I are Bitcoiners and
Mhm.
we're trying to think long term. Uh, but how do you convince a politician to think long term when he or she is probably thinking about getting elected and number two, getting re-elected?
Yeah, good question. Very good question. Well, a lot of the politicians exist so because it's their job. They're career politicians. So how to get them to think about something that could actually threaten their job in the long term is very difficult. But they have to understand that Bitcoin is intergenerational wealth, and they have to say, if you really care about doing good for your country, for your people, then you should definitely consider Bitcoin as that option. Bitcoin solves so many problems that you're here that so many problems that give you the job that you have today. You have the power or the influence now to change people's lives by helping people understand that the money that we've all been dealing with for the last 100 years is broken. It doesn't really mean anything, and if anything, it's created it's created so many of our world's problems. So yeah, how to convince a politician that is I think it's through. I mean, the incentives, you have to give them incentives saying that, that you will be making money as well on the side with Bitcoin. Your family will be better off as well. But not just that, but the people that you serve, family, I say people you serve, they serve, the politicians should be serving us. Their wealth will be better protected going to the future. You will be leaving a better future, a better civilization. Families will be more comfortable to have more children, to get into productive jobs, to do beautiful things, not to just work for the sake of working, work for the sake of living a beautiful. I mean, yeah, I can go on about this, but I think you get my point.
Yeah, sure. I think I agree with you. And I think what we're going to see in practice is some are good and some are bad, right? And some
Yes.
will, uh, you know, uh, I think I understand that, President Bukele of El Salvador did take some criticism. Look, there's always going to be criticism, but it
Yep.
could have been a lot worse, right? Like the way he did things, he could have started his own shitcoin. He could have been like very open to the crypto people, and credit to them, they were they were Bitcoin only, and so
Yep.
I think that's interesting, right? Whereas if you rewind the clock, prior to the El Salvador thing, like 3 or 4 years ago, there was this Venezuela, and they started their own shitcoin, right? They had this Petro shitcoin, and other countries and things like this were just very very much flirting with random altcoins. And so
Correct.
I
Yeah.
think there's something to that. Or another quote unquote bad example, even I noticed in recent years, is the Ukraine example, right? So Ukraine, when the Russia Ukraine war started, they were asking for Bitcoin donations. So they were saying, yeah, yeah, please give us your Bitcoin to help us, fund this effort. And okay, that's interesting from a Bitcoin narrative perspective. But then here's the downside. At one point, they were actually banning Ukrainians from buying Bitcoin with the Ukrainian hryvnia, or their
That's
currency, the UAH currency, right? So it's kind of like, in some cases, we'll see politicians and people in power say, "Hey, Bitcoin for me, but not for thee," right? And that's kind of,
yeah.
it's the same parallel that we see even with like this, the carbon hysterics, right? Because they say, "Oh, I'm going to fly to Davos in the
Yes,
mountains of
exactly.
Switzerland on a private jet. But you plebs, you're not allowed to do what these elite people will say. And so I think that's we're going to see some good and some bad.
But right
I'm curious
now,
what you think. Yeah.
well, no, right now in El Salvador, going back to El Salvador, look, you can criticize it being too much of a top-down approach, but look what's happening to the economy there. It's it's flourishing now. GDP up. GDP is up in like I think this year it's up about 6 or 7, 8% or something. I don't know the numbers. I'm just ballparking there, but around that. This is driven mainly through tourism. El Salvador 5, 6 years ago, not many people could actually point El Salvador on the map, and then President Bukele gets elected because he's not corruptible because he comes from wealth himself. He was able to dismantle, or not dismantle, but break deals with the cartel leaders there and turn El Salvador, which was one of the murder capitals in the world, into a safe place. And then thanks to Bitcoin, now tourists are going there. And not only that, he's actually the country is open for other nationalities to move there as well. And people are moving there because of the Bitcoin legal tender. People are able to go there, and obviously it's not too expensive, but people can go there and bring their Bitcoin, bring their wealth, and start a comfortable life there. Uh, that's fantastic. Other countries should be following a suit. Other countries would be like, I want that for my country. So yeah, I think smaller countries, like I say, El Salvador was about 6 million people. I don't think that's small, but countries of that size, which have like more homogeneous populations, are able to make quicker decisions. Should follow. Thinking about it, they should follow a suit if their politicians are correctly advised. I mean,
Yeah,
that's
and hopefully we do see that. And I think it's also interesting that it's like it reminds me a little bit of the Clayton Christensen's innovator's dilemma, right? So there are certain countries where maybe they're just in a position where it's too difficult for them to turn the ship, right? And so
yes,
of course we're trying. Everyone should be trying to do what they can, but there are certain countries where maybe it's like trying to turn this big cruise liner, and you can't. They're not as nimble. Whereas, like, let's say the smaller and some of the medium-sized countries, maybe they're a little
yeah,
bit more agile, or maybe they're a challenger nation and they've got more to prove, something to prove, more to fight for, and maybe they're more willing to
correct, yes,
try
yeah.
something that's a bit more out there. And maybe that's where this idea of Bitcoin legal tender comes into play. Hopefully,
Yeah, exactly. And also, yeah, and going back to one of our previous topics is capital gains tax. Anyone who gets rid of the capital gains tax and allows Bitcoin to transact freely is essentially adopting Bitcoin as illegal tender. That if that will then incentivize small businesses to say, we accept Bitcoin, and where these small businesses accept Bitcoin, then they will come. Bitcoiners will go there. This is the beautiful thing about Bitcoin. It's that network, that effect that has. And when people see a Bitcoin accepting cafe or butchery or shop, so and so shop, people will go there and say, "Hey, look!" Then they will go and help that place out. Um, yeah, it works. So yeah, getting rid of capital gains tax is really important. I think.
yeah. So actually, I'm curious then, if you had to, I don't know if you've thought deeply about this or not, but if you had to stack rank them, or in terms of most important, let's say, governmental policies that helps Bitcoin, right? Is it mining? Is it holding some on the balance sheet? Is it taking away the capital gains tax? Is it legal tender?
Well, that's a good question.
Where would you
I guess
what's the most important thing from a
depends on
nation
the
state adoption point of view?
depends on the jurisdiction, but I think number one will probably my opinion is probably removing capital gains tax and allowing the money to transact freely, because that will actually Bitcoin will flourish doing its bottom up thing, which is designed to do. But then then countries that have energy, considerable amounts of energy, and especially countries that have um, poorly infrastructured energy, then that mining in those countries really essential. And what else? And on balance sheets, just as important. But yeah, I think already, about I think central banks already have. They won't going to tell. They're not going to tell us, but they already have. I'm sure of it. They have Bitcoin on their balance sheet. if Bitcoin is a threat to central banking, so the logical hedge, insurance hedge against that threat is to actually own the thing that's threatening you. So it's to own Bitcoin. So if you have like if you think of it as like a 1% threat, you own 1% of your balance sheet of Bitcoin, or it's like 10% balance sheet of Bitcoin. But I wouldn't be surprised if central banks already own a lot of Bitcoin. So I don't
That's
know,
a fascinating idea, and I'm curious how they would get around it, like from a disclosures point of view, because wouldn't they, like a lot of them, have to put out annual reports and show, okay, this
yeah,
is how much foreign currency we have. But I'm
maybe
curious, maybe they find a way to hide it somewhere. I don't know.
maybe not the more transparent Western nations, but maybe your Saudi Arabias, and I don't know, maybe the Feds in the US. Then it's not a public country. The Federal Reserve Bank, that's private. We don't know what they're holding. We know how much cash they have, but I don't know. I'm not the expert there, but I presume other central banks in less transparent countries have to have it, and it's easy to hide with a few accounting techniques. I mean, that's how the world works.
Of course, yeah. So yeah, going back to our stack ranking. So I would
Yeah,
say, so do you, I think
yeah,
we probably agree then. I think number one most important thing, if on our wish list, is removing capital gains tax on
yes,
Bitcoin and
because
allowing people to freely spend it,
that's
save it,
essentially
etc.
that's a legal tender without being a legal tender. Yeah.
Right, right. And so then probably second or third, what would you say, like engaging in mining, or would you say maybe just like opening up the market for Bitcoin mining, or I don't know, maybe stuff around the freedoms required, right? Like we saw recently the Tornado Cash thing with the developer
Mm,
getting arrested by the Netherlands financial police, basically, or financial crime unit or something. I guess having that freedom for developers to be able to contribute code probably is also an important factor
yes. Yeah,
in
that's
in
true.
the overall Bitcoin adoption story. So that's probably an important aspect also. And I mean, some would argue in America, the right of freedom of speech can arguably play into that too.
Yeah. I think another point is to crack down on shitcoins. To make a law that differentiating Bitcoin from other cryptos. I mean, it's if once you start learning about it, you only need 10. No, you only need an hour or two of learning. Okay, depending on each individual, but you realize that both are completely different. So, and that you want to protect people because that's most shitcoiners. Most 99% of them are rug pulls to be. So yeah, protection from kids. I say kids, sorry, from people from shitcoin. But no, I mean that's half jokes. I would say no. I would say yeah. I'd say going back to mining. Yeah, it's not something that I'm very clued up on the mining thing. I've never actually seen a mining rig operation happening. So I mean, I've met miners before. I mean, I've met like for example Pierre Rochard and some other people. And what I understand about mining is that it's the whole the energy FUD thing, which I sort of believed in 5 years ago, which now after studying realized that actually no, it actually incentivizes energy revolution for cleaner energy and for more efficient use of energy for hydrocarbons, which are very essential. We need hydrocarbons to exist and to continue existing, and we're not going to do without them if we want to move to the second phase of our civilization. So any way to make mining, Bitcoin mining only, Bitcoin timestamping only, open, available, and what in the country, I think very important.
Yeah. And speaking of all of the FUD lines, I'm curious, this is probably something that you will have to engage with quite often in your discussions with people, because I'm sure you'll hear the same lines, right? Like, oh, it's dirty money laundering, it's using too much energy, it's etc. So uh what do you see as the best response in those kinds of cases, right? Because I'm sure you're talking to somebody who is relatively new. How do you best deal with people who say, "Oh, okay, Bitcoin's going to enable, terrorism financing or something like that"?
Well, yeah. Well, that's the thing. People, hopefully, that's over by now. That Bitcoin is good for criminal activity. I mean, they don't realize that there's an open ledger there. It's probably one of the worst things to use for criminal activity. Um, yes, there's the privacy things are concerned around it, but no, Bitcoin is not. It's not good for using as for money laundering and stuff like that. It's not very good at all. The dollar, the fiat, is much better for that. So I mean, that's a pretty easy bunk, I think, for
Yeah.
other people. But the other thing is, yeah, the energy thing. It's easy because you then tell them about that it's actually, if you look at it in a counterintuitive way, why it needs to use that much energy and how that actually solves the energy crisis, then people start to open their eyes, and that's another easier bunk, but it still requires a little bit of thought, more thought. What's the other thing I get? Oh yeah, I get some people like, oh, I've had it a few times. Oh, I like to hold the money in my hand. I like to feel the weight of my
They
money,
want the tangible, yeah.
the tangible aspect. Well, I say that's true with gold. You can actually hold a weight of money in the gold, but when it came to transporting it over time and space, and actually entrusting someone to hold it, to hold it for you in a reserve, in a treasury, that's where the corruption came in. And they're like, oh yeah, I see. But no, I like to get, well, I'm sure in the future there'll be ways of of holding your
Well,
Bitcoin. But what?
like the Open Dime or,
Yeah,
Sats
yeah,
card and things like that. But
exactly.
obviously
That's right.
they're not quite the same, but yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And then I go to tell them, well, with the money that you're holding right now, that piece of paper, do you think it's backed by gold? Some people do think it's backed by gold. Some people still to this day think it's backed by gold. I did maybe 7, 8 years ago. No, maybe about 10 years ago, when you realize that the pound is not backed by gold. Yeah, it's true. It's true. People do think it's backed by gold. They don't
Yeah.
have. They know what happened in 1971. They don't know what happened in 1913. Actually, it was around then when things went
Yeah,
horribly
when the
wrong.
Federal Reserve is created and all the different monetary standards that we've
Yeah,
gone
yeah,
through. Of course, one of the best books on this is Murray Rothbard's book, What Has Government Done to Our Money? It's a nice short read for anyone who hasn't,
yeah.
any listeners, if you haven't checked that out, it's free over at Mises.org. And I think the other big one you'll get is the volatility, right? So they'll
Oh
say,
yeah,
oh,
well,
Bitcoin is so volatile. Why would I
sorry, that's
use
the other
it?
one. Yeah,
You know,
yeah, that's another big one. It's like, oh, right now in Serbia, I'm like, oh yeah, they like to ask me questions now about Bitcoin because they say, oh, Bitcoin's crashed. I'm like, yes, so. Well, are you still happy? I was like, oh no, no. He was like, oh, are you still happy? I was like, yep, I'm buying more now. But it's crashed. I was like, no, the fundamentals are still there and actually stronger. Then now is a good time to buy, and it's always been a good time to buy. And then I tell them about DCA, which dollar cost averaging. You buy once every week or so, the same time, and over time that um, gives you a good entry price, and you just set that on automatic purchases, and that just, you don't have to worry about anything. But also at the same time, it shows that Bitcoin is volatile because it's still in its infancy as well, and that's exciting for investors as well because it shows that it's growing. You can't grow without volatility. Volatility is necessary. Bitcoin's only had about truly about 10 years of network effect, and it's growing all the time. So of course you're going to get a lot of volatility, but that volatility is going up more than down, and yeah, that's that's
right.
that's
And
exciting.
right, and as also even with Aqua and stuff like that, having access to USDT potentially, I mean that's part of the argument, I guess, is to see whether stablecoins can help for those people who are in that sort of, maybe they're curious or open minded, but they just can't hack the volatility. Okay, so in that case, that's the argument. Would they benefit from using liquid
Yes,
USDT as an example?
yes,
And then
yes,
hopefully they could transition over. I guess that's the hope, is that they could then come over into Bitcoin. And theoretically, I mean, there are even non KYC swap markets and providers and things like this where people can like swap their USDT into Bitcoin. Like, let's say now they're reading, they're reading Safety, they're listening to my podcast, they're listening to you, they're talking to you or whatever, and now they're like, yeah, actually, I want to hold some Bitcoin. Okay, I need to change my tether into Bitcoin. Maybe that's the way it goes.
well, exactly. I mean, to have a wallet that you're able to go from one to another, I think that's really useful. And the fact that you have a wallet, even if you want to hold USDT, you're still getting training on how to have a wallet and holding something in there. That's that's protected by you. It's your keys. It's your keys as well. It's your money. Yeah, it's not the right money, but it's yours.
Right.
But yeah, I
Yeah, and
get
I
that.
I,
Yeah.
I wonder what kinds of trade offs will be made over time, in terms of growing the numbers, right, of people, right, and I guess there is like perhaps a little bit of an eternal September here, because it's like the eternal September problem. It's this idea that because there are a lot of new people coming in, and they don't quite all they don't necessarily all share that same ethos of, let's say, some earlier Bitcoiners. And so I think, how can the tooling be made? How can the education be done? How can the culture be such that people who are new can sort of be inculcated with the Bitcoin ethos, the Bitcoin values, as
Mm,
opposed to just trying to recreate the fiat system?
right. Yeah, I mean, education. I think I'm answering your question right with this is just getting in, just downloading a wallet and getting your hands dirty is the best education you can do. Learning how to use Bitcoin, and the technology since I've been around it's gotten much easier to use, and it's going to get much easier to use. It's yeah. I think people should just really just try it out. What else
Yeah.
can I say?
Yeah, I think it is. It comes down to learning by doing for many people.
Yeah.
It's easy to talk about things, but it really comes down to actually doing things in practice. And I think that's really where the rubber meets the road. And I think what happens
Mm,
for a lot of people, at least in my experience, is there are people who might have spoken about things, or maybe they haven't really actually tried to put it into practice. And I think that's also part of the culture as well, is to sort of
mm.
reject LARPing and reject sort of just uh, talking about things without really being about it. And so I think maybe that's where things are going to go.
Yeah. I mean, really, at the end of the day, the simplicity of Bitcoin, it's really its beauty. When people learn about it as an inflation hedge, well, people think, okay, right now the inflation hedge is broken. Yeah, but okay, maybe in the last 6 months, you can argue against that. But no, if you look back historically for the last 5 years, if you hold Bitcoin for 5 years, as you would do with, or more, for 10 years or more, that's investing horizon. For savings, it's going to keep on going up. And to have that option to have your dollars or fiat and stuff kind of go into Bitcoin to protect from inflation is it's beautiful, really. I mean, just knowing that there's only ever going to be 21 million, it's I to that it to me that is just it's something that's going to change humanity for the better.
And I also wonder, I think this is something I've theorized about and thought about for a while, is that I genuinely do believe that it will change the way governments are, and it'll essentially make them smaller, because they won't be able to fund things as cheaply. It'll take a while for that effect to happen.
Yes.
It's not going to happen tomorrow. But yeah, I'm curious what you think about that. Like, do you believe that it will actually change the institutions of society in a sense?
Well, yes, I think and I hope it will. Institutions, from money itself, to health institution, to education, to education. As I said, education. Sorry, it's they're completely corrupt at the moment. Infrastructure, everything. They're just creating projects because they can print this money, and it's just for the sake of creating jobs that we don't really need, and it's a waste. It's a waste of resource, a waste of time, and everything. And I think people are starting to wake up to that. And when you go back, if you go back to hard money, non-inflationary, deflationary money like Bitcoin, then people will be frugal about how to spend their money and how to fund projects. And this is where we will finally have proper, sustainable business plans, not just short-term thinking that just makes things for the hell of making them, and then they break a couple of years later, and then you have to make another one because that's the business model. Things like things like that. So, and going to politicians, yeah, I think the politicians who embrace Bitcoin know, and who understand Bitcoin know very well that there will be less jobs for politicians in the future. I hope that's the case. um,
Yeah,
yeah,
so it maybe in a sense, there's a few of them who realize that if they've got a good nose or a good ear to the ground, they can see, okay, this is the way things are going. It's
yeah,
better to at least ride this wave for what we possibly can, as opposed to trying to stop
yeah.
this thing, because you can't really stop this thing.
This is a call out to all politicians: is if you wanted to make a change for the future and be seen as a hero, like you've always wanted to be seen as a hero because a lot of politicians are in there for the publicity as well. They want to help people, but they like the stage and say, make a difference for humanity and push for Bitcoin adoption because history will remember you very kindly.
Yeah, I think that's a great spot to finish. So, politicians, make sure you make a difference for humanity. So, Philip, where can people find you and Jan3?
Jan3 can be found on Twitter. I think it's just at Jan3, I think.
Yeah, so it's Jan3.com is the
Jan3.com,
Jan3.com,
yeah.
and Jan3.com is the website there.
Yeah.
But yeah, Philip, thank you for joining me today.
Jan3.com.
And
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
oh, and sorry, and your if
My
people want to find
Twitter
any of your stuff.
my Twitter is at Prince Philip, but that's PRINCFILIP, the Serbian way of spelling it.
Okay, got it. It's Philip with an F, guys. All right,
And
Philip,
both
thank you for joining me.
Jan3 and mine, we do have Instagram as well, but you'll be able to find them as well.
Okay, great. Thank
Okay.
you.
All right. Thanks.